So, hello and welcome to, I guess, just another chat with me, Steelfur, your resident L5R commentator, I guess. Brief introduction for those of you who don't know me. My name is Finbar, aka Steelfur on Discord. I am an L5R commentator, streamer, current organizer of the L5R London Legion online tournament series, and former host of the Court Games LCG podcast, who is just about to configure his camera because for some reason it did not work a second ago. Other way. Okay, there we go. I always have technical difficulties because I'm not really good at making these videos, but I like to do them anyway. So our talking points today are quite broad. We're going to be talking about the LCG. We're going to be talking about storytelling. And we're going to be talking about stagnation and change and time skips. For a brief summary, just so you get the gist of the episode, we're going to talk about how storytelling and changing settings maintains freshness in card games. We're going to discuss whether or not the inherent flaw in the LCG release model in terms of the delayed gaps between core sets and reboots really doesn't work when you've got a living world rather than a static one based on an IP like Star Wars or Game of Thrones. We're going to talk about old L5R and time skips and how that led to a great deal of change and excitement in how stories progressed. And we're going to talk about the problem with the core set and how to deal with the problem and keep a game feeling fresh when you're playing with the same cards for multiple years. So with that summary in mind, I appreciate this is going to be quite an interesting topic for some people. I'm keen to get your feedback. So let's just dive sort of straight into it. So storytelling and card game freshness. So we have, luckily in this situation, a few very direct comparisons where it comes from card games and story freshness. So if we take the overall previous story of L5R, we can see, Dawn of the Empire led into Scorpion Clan Coup, led into Clan Wars, led into Hidden Emperor, led into Four Winds, led into Reign of Blood, led into Age of Enlightenment, led into Race for the Throne, Destroyer War, Age of Exploration, Brothers Destiny at 20 festivals, and finally into Onyx Edition. Now, how long did it take to get through what is essentially, I don't know how many years, but a couple hundred years in the Empire's sort of history. This stage, from Scorpion Clan Clue to Clan Wars to Hidden Emperor, Four Winds, pretty much went on as normal. And there was a time skip, I think, around about the Destroyer War, maybe. I can't remember exactly when the time skip was. And then the Age of Exploration was a time skip as well. But the idea is that within a certain span of years, you had very drastic differences in terms of settings and the main characters and players, because L5R did actually stick to quite a strict, this is how long people would have lived in a feudal environment, and you might have had a clan champion for 20 years, but then the next one would come along. So when you go through the span of 20 years, you actually change characters quite a lot. So let's look a bit more at how this breaks down. So pre-Imperial, so this is the up here, Dawn of the Empire, Scorpion Clan Coup era, and the Clan Wars all happened up here, so 1995 to 1998, including the first Day of Thunder. Then we had Hidden Emperor, which was Jade, which is down here, which was, I think, lasted for 2 years, 2000. And then we had Gold Edition, which lasted for another 3 years. And then Lotus, which lasted for another 3 years. And basically every 3 years, you were changing not only strongholds, you were changing the rules a bit, you were changing key personalities, and you were advancing the story to a brand new plot. You were changing factions. You were doing all of these things to keep the game feeling fresh, and changing personalities as well is quite key. If we compare that to the current game, we can see that between 2019 and 2020, we have essentially gone from Hero of the Clans to essentially kind of like the Scorpion Clan, like, there's no spoilers, but kind of like the Scorpion Clan Coup, where the Emperor is dead and Shoju is now ruling various things, right? So we've done essentially what I think is a year, 2 years worth of plot. Well, not like a year's worth of plot, really, because we're talking about up here somewhere in 3, right? And that's kind of reflected in terms of the way the game feels. So I want to talk about what happens in that space of 3 years in terms of the old game, because you start off with Clan Wars, you start off with cards that look like this, and then by the time you hit 2001, so that's kind of like 6 years after the game came out, but still sort of like fairly aggressive. And even by the time you hit sort of up here in terms of Spirit Wars and things like that, you were starting to see personalities rotate out. Yukuni, for example, died in the Day of Thunder, so you'd start to see other characters coming in to replace him, like Hoshi and then Satsu. And within a short space of time, of a good 3 or 4 years, you would rotate out your core character, Yukuni, who your clan gets very attached to, and replace him with a new character you could get attached to, who's going into new situations with a new plot, and essentially someone to get excited about. And we see that across all the clans. You know, Sukun gets replaced by Mirabu, gets replaced by Tsukimi, who then sticks around forever because she's kind of like immortal or really old or something happened to her. You know, blind clan champion with lots of swords and a stick, but can't seem to die and gets up to experience 5. You know, Shoju turns from an undead zombie, you get Panicky, you get Nitoshi. The point is that you have this progression of characters out over the span of the game, and there was a lot more characters in between those. I just picked a few that sort of highlighted the change. And in the space of maybe 3 or 4 years, and every 3 or 4 years, you would have this great change in terms of key personalities getting an update, becoming experienced, a rotation of the central core of the game. Though, let's be honest, that if you look at the old editions of the game, a new base set like Jade Edition, Diamond Edition, Gold Edition would reprint a lot of cards, and they had ways of reprinting personalities. They had a mechanic called Soul of, where essentially a new personality would be printed who was basically an exact copy of the stats of an older personality, and you could play the old card if you wanted to. And that was just a way of recycling some generic templates that felt good for certain characters, kind of like the way your Niten Master might get recycled, or your Niten Adept might get recycled and reused in a new core set. But the fact is that the main characters changed and the storyline changed at I would say quite an aggressive pace compared to what we're currently seeing in the new game. And in my mind, that's quite important, because when the characters don't change, well, we'll get into this a bit more later, because we're going to have a whole section about core. I guess the thing is, I want to kind of talk about a comparison then, of course, with Game of Thrones. So a Game of Thrones ran for, this is the second version, ran for 4 years, 5 years-ish. And in that time, we had 4 versions of Jon Snow. The story went through the books as they've been published. And then when the books were done, it died. And obviously for that game, you had to reprint Jon Snow. You had to keep the characters who were alive in the books alive in the game, and you had to use the same characters, which means it made sense from a design perspective that you started with a core that had one version of all of those characters. You reprinted versions of those characters over 4 years. And then by the end of the game, people still want to play with those headline characters that they were given 4 years ago. They might have been power creeped out by a new version or a version that's themed around a certain deck, but ultimately you're happy playing the same cards. And one of the things I find quite interesting, and I wonder about L5R, is the same thing true? And this, I think, is something that I'll throw open to answers in the comments on this video, is the same thing true? So are L5R players happy with the idea that you're going to be playing Mitsu, Yukuni, Hitomi, the dragon example, showed you Kachiko for Scorpion for 7+ years? Because remember that Game of Thrones ended after 4 years because it ran out of content, but L5R doesn't have that problem. You know, we're going to be playing this cycle with these characters until either a new core comes out, or there's a rotation that effectively bans the old characters, or something else happens that makes you not want to play these characters anymore. And currently the cycle idea for that is that in 7 years' time, we're still going to be in this cycle, so we're not going to have rotated these guys out. And that's a genuine question, because from my perspective, and one of the reasons I'm making this video and I'm enjoying talking through this as a concept, is that I feel that playing those same characters for another 3 years doesn't feel like the L5R that I enjoy. And not to complain and say, oh, things were better before. I just mean in terms of progressive storytelling, um, fictional characters in a fictional world define their importance to you by their actions and also by what happens to them as a result of their actions. Now, if, for example, Mitsu survives everything and is kicking around, then great. Okay, Mitsu should be older. He should be more experienced. He should have an experienced version of him that is the latest version, and you should want to play that. But you shouldn't be able to play his younger version anymore. That younger version is dead. Um, Same thing goes for for any character really. As they gain knowledge and experience and ways of acting, it's not like Game of Thrones where we're printing 4 versions of Jon Snow and they're all legal, or the first one rotated out, but they're essentially the same character. We should have a delineated progression of time that indicates when certain characters can be played based on their progression through the story, because that in turn makes you value the characters for the story that they have lived through. So when I think about L5R, I think about these characters coming in and living that heroic storytelling where they do grand things and they burn really fast. And this idea of mono aware that's captured in the game mechanics kind of needs to apply to the characters that we play with and see as well. So when we think about this comparison between old L5R, between Yakuni and Hoshi and Satsu, and then into Shike's amazing art on Shike, we think about why each of these characters was important to us based on the story that they were set against, but also the fact that they did something and then left. Now, if we think about, how long it takes for us to feel like those characters have sort of lived their part, is it 3 years? Is it 7 years? Is it 10? Is it shorter? For me, there isn't enough story happening to these characters to justify keeping them around in their current form for 7 years. Like, story is happening across the Empire at a reasonable pace, but also just not happening particularly fast in terms of timescales. We had that 6 months that was actually 24 hours, I think, in one of the stories where it was the 24 hours when various things were going on and everyone was responsive to them, but that came out over 6 months. So, that's 24 hours, 6 months versus, 3 years for an entire story arc in old L5R, or, a year for an entire book in a Game of Thrones, which would be about a year and a half in Game of Thrones timing. So, when we're thinking about that progression of characters, do we reach a situation where something should have just happened to all of the champions? Like, something should have just happened. They should have changed, their successor should have come along. How long are we going to be happy with them coming? So if we think about the story in terms of where it is, it's very believable that we're going towards a sort of Day of Thunder thing again. I think the story team would be right to do Day of Thunder. I think that's a seminal moment in L5R, the second Day of Thunder. I think it is nostalgia for a lot of people. I think it's also a very powerful storytelling moment. I don't think it will go entirely the same way that it did before, but I think that there's a lot of, Rokugan lore and things like that tied into the new Day of Thunder. And if we reach that point, when will it be? Are we talking because it makes sense, and this is kind of where I want to come to in this discussion, because I've kind of already talked a bit about the difference in speed between how the old game developed, how Game of Thrones developed, and I want to talk about sort of the what I consider to be potentially an inherent flaw in the LCG model for story-driven games like L5R, which is that these characters have to stay relevant in the card game when really they should reach a point where they're changing in the storyline, and you should have maybe in a core set an original version of Mitsu again, or Yakuni, who then gets banned and replaced by an experienced version that comes out in, say, cycle 3 or something like that. And you shouldn't be able to play the original version because he's moved on from that. There needs to be some sort of aggressive movement in terms of character progression, because you know, there are a few things that are sort of coming into this discussion, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to make this video. And the first one is this idea of story permanence and how quickly characters change, how quickly stories can change when you have this core set that sticks around for 7 or 8 years. How quickly Rokugan can change when you can't cycle out any of the core personalities because they're in the core set, therefore they have to stay relevant. And then also the effects of the core set on the LCG itself. So let's break down then from this perspective of core set rotation, right? So we know currently that the rotation cycle for the game is approximately 7 years. They were going to do it after cycle 5, which is the next cycle after this one. Or sorry, at the start of cycle 5, so this year or late this year or next year maybe. We know that that's been pushed back to cycle 7 because, you know, for reasons. Maybe there was a feeling there weren't enough cards in the card pool for certain clans. Maybe there was a feeling that certain clans had only just gotten to a good place and had multiple decks, and that if you did a rotation, those clans would no longer have access to core cards that gave them power. You know, generally with the LCG model, it's hard to know when you reached a point where clans have enough cards that you can healthily rotate, especially given the power level of certain clan packs like Dragon, which didn't have the impact on the meta that they could have had. And, you know, it's hard to predict exactly what you're going to do from that point. So there's that to consider, that this core set probably has to last until 2023. At least at this point, I think. Let's just check my timeline. Yeah, 27, so 7 years, 2023. Which means that these characters have to stay relevant until roughly 2023, because people will still be buying the core set and they're going to want to come into the game and they're going to go and find some of the latest fiction, they're going to read it, and if they don't recognize any of the people because they haven't bought the latest clan pack, then those characters aren't going to be relevant to them and they're going to be turned off the setting. So does that mean then that the time scale for the development from now until the Day of Thunder is 3 years? So we've reached a point where on the old time scale we were at the Scorpion Clan coup leading into the Clan Wars, which led to the Day of Thunder. You know, we're about here, you know, Scorpion Clan, but Hantai, I think the numbers are different here. This is the 39th. We've just had the 38th dead. But obviously the whole thing's changed, so we can't rely on that. But we're roughly here, which is roughly, you know, about here, I think. And then moving into the Day of Thunder, which is like up here, basically. I really don't know these old sets very well, if I'm being honest. My point is that we're roughly at a point where in the old game, the Day of Thunder would be approximately 6 months to a year away, I would say. Someone can correct me on that, but certainly within the next year and a half or so, or the next year. And in the LCG terms, it might be 3 years away. Because I guess my point is the only way I see the Day of Thunder happening in terms of LCG progression is if there is a drastic place where you can cycle out core personalities and replace them with new ones that gain meaning in a post Day of Thunder world. I think if you leave the core the way it is, you create an essential stagnation problem where the same characters still exist, even though the story may have moved on, you know, and there's no getting rid of them because of power levels and how strong they are and how important they are to the clan, because you've designed future sets based around the fact that this pack isn't going away and the power level of those cards has to be respected. So it's kind of interesting. Yeah, I feel like this episode is rambling a bit because it's one of those topics where all of the things kind of mesh together. So you've got this idea of a problem with having a core set and how long is that core set going to last, which ties into how long is the story taking to progress to a point where we would expect to see a drastic defining Rokugan hero moment, which leads to mass change in who is clan champion, who is the main personality for your faction, who's in charge, and all these sorts of things. And the question is then, sorry, ink on my hands, you know, can those two unite in a way that feels satisfying to a player base? Could we reach a point where we have the Day of Thunder happening at, say, cycle 6, but core still is there and hasn't rotated out? If we don't get a core 2.0, how do we handle the story moving forwards in a way that feels satisfying and encourages people to put away their older cards in favor of the new champion or the new, you know, personality or whatever? And this is a tricky topic to sort of tackle, because if we look at the current game and the way it is, now I've used the statistic a bit. I like it as a statistic. It's not 100% true in every single case, but loosely, if you look at a modern meta deck, around 50% of the cards are going to be core cards, right? Your Niten Masters, your basic one drops, your Doom Shigengers, your Tagashi Initiates, your Tagashi Yakunis, your Storehouses, your Favorable Grounds, Bonsai's, Court Games, you know, all those sorts of cards that everyone is used to playing with. Now, there are two schools of thought that you can take on this. You can take on it that it's good, that all decks come with a sort of set group of powerful cards. That means that there's a skeleton for new people and for people building decks, so that they build around those, and therefore there's a certain amount of predictability in deck building. And also, you know, in other card games, you know, old L5R, those cards existed as well. They were reprinted. They were sneak attacks. They were, you know, there are regular cards basically that crop up as a repeated idea in card games that are useful. And just because a new version with alt art or something like that isn't printed doesn't mean that those cards are no longer useful, right? Take your Llanowar Elves in Magic, which keeps getting reprinted, your basic 1 tap for 1 mana. There are variants on that, but that card itself does keep getting reprinted in core Magic editions, because that card is seen as vital to green as an idea. Therefore, having that card around, even if you don't update it for 7 years, isn't a problem, because you view that as a core competency of that color. So it doesn't matter if you get rid of it, if you don't get rid of it, right? So that's one way of thinking about it. Core is okay because these are the central cards that define the theme for a clan, and it's good that every clan has a basic framework of what core cards to include for their deck. That's good for new players because 50% of their cards will always be available to them if they buy the base set of the game, and the rest can be modular based on what the current meta is. There's lots of arguments for core staying relevant for a long period of time. A lot of them are financial, a lot of them are new player friendly, a lot of them are that sort of thing. These points where it, you know, if I can tell someone buy 3 core and the latest 5 packs for Dragon, and you will have a meta Dragon deck or something close to it, then that is a good way to get people into the game. Similarly, again, as I said, having these cards that stay true to the theme of the game and are just always available to you does not necessarily mean that those cards aren't there. The real issue which we have is that twofold. So because the other view on the core is that decks need to rotate more aggressively to stay fresh. The fact that 50% of, and this is the other view, that 50% of core cards are still in decks is a failure to properly design a good strength core set, which in turn means that core can never be outmatched, because you can't power creep away the cards, because the new cards would be ridiculously stupid in terms of the game mechanics. You can't replace them with weaker cards, because you can't ban too many cards from core and still have it be your entry-level product for new gamers. You cannot replace them with weaker cards because no one will take the old cards out of their deck. You can't restrict too many of them. You can't ban too many of them. They just stick around forever, and players get bored of constantly putting the same cards in their deck year after year after year. Now, those two ideas, which one I approve of? I personally believe the second one. I'm really tired with this idea that the majority of my deck is still the same cards I've been playing for the past 3 years, and there hasn't been a super rotation. But I acknowledge that that is somewhat unrealistic, and also somewhat like just anti my experience playing card games, where, you know, In old L5R, I got 3 sneak attacks. I put them in my deck every single cycle, and I was happy to have 3 of them. And I was playing my gold edition ones in Diamond, you know, and in 20 festivals, I think, yeah. And you know, in Magic, I have a playset of very nice alt art Llanowar elves that I bust out whenever I'm building a green deck, whenever they're legal. Like, so you know, there is a but I think it's about percentages, right? Because I would always feel in the old game I would have my 3 sneak attacks. I may have 3 deadly ground or something like that. I might have 6 cards or 10 cards, maybe a third of the deck, or no, maybe more like a quarter or a fifth of the deck would be reprinted. And then on the Dynasty side, maybe like a fifth of the cards would be the soul of the reprinted versions of other cards. And then you know, in Magic it might be 8 cards out of 60. It's about percentages. So if it's reprints of core cards, like if you decide that Dragon absolutely has to have, like what card would I even say? Tagashi Initiate. That's a really good. Is a solid 1-drop with a neat dragon-like ability, reasonably strong but not overpowered. So you decide that that is a core monk card for Dragon. So it's your Llanowar elves of L5R, and you're going to reprint that in every single core you make for the rest of the game, because that's Dragon right there. And the same is true for maybe Soci Illusionist or, you know, not Callow Delegate, Savvy Politician. You know, all of these cards, whatever cards you pick from every clan that you really think capture the main theme of the game and aren't overpowered. Reprinting those is always going to be the right decision because they give the card game a base thing. The real problem then with core is power level, because you have certain cards that you can't ever get rid of that are also drastically above the power level of every card that you could print in the future that might replace them. Replacing court games with something that only honors a character, for example, or only dishonors a character, you never do it because court games can do both. So that essentially is the problem, a twofold problem. The effect on the LCG of the core in terms of the core strength, the effect on the LCG in terms of the feelings of characters. Oh, this is the part I forgot. Sorry. The other part about problems with core being the same for a very long period of time is, of course, that in other games, the bits that do change quite rapidly in a game like Magic or in a game like old L5R are your key personalities, your planeswalkers, not your staples, but your key personalities. And I think actually, and this is kind of, I'm going to say this will be an edge feeling, but personally, in my opinion, putting the clan champions in the core set, putting clan champions and unique personalities in the core set was a mistake. Because when you expect that product to stick around for 7 years, those unique characters are going to stagnate in terms of story, but you can't necessarily get rid of them for reasons I've explained before, because when people are buying the core set, they need to engage with the story. So you create a problem for yourself where the core set can't be timeless because you've included time-limited characters, which need to, for the sake of the story progression in the game, have that Mono Warrior where they do interesting stuff and then pass on the mantle or move on. But if they're in the core set that need to stay legal, they can't do that as quickly as they probably need to. So that's the third issue with the core set. You've got people who think that it's good because you've got these staple cards. You've got people who think that more of the staple cards need to be power leveled out or power creeped out, and less of the core needs to be relevant right now. And then you've got this third thought, which is that unique personalities should never have been in the core because it's impossible to get rid of them as quickly as you need to. And that would have made us wait basically until the first cycle to get our champion, to get our key like Raitsugus, to get our core unique characters, which would have felt bad because those unique characters are what drive our enjoyment of L5R and seeing how they move through the world. But it would have made sense because then you could have rotated out champions quicker, or just if they're in a pack in a cycle, it's a lot easier to ban a card in a pack in a cycle because you print a new pack in a new cycle that's still only $10. And, you know, you're not taking away a card from core that people have to buy 3 of. You're not creating an entry problem for new players because they can just not buy that pack. Banning cards in cycles is a lot easier than banning cards in core, as far as I can see. You know, so for me, that would have been the way to avoid this problem from the start, is not to put unique characters that you cared about in core. Maybe put one, but not put your champions in, that sort of thing. Not put the characters that you need to show progressing through the story for certain in core. But that ship has already sailed. So let's talk about how you fix the core problem. Now, everyone's going to say the obvious solution is core 2.0. Sure, yeah. The obvious solution is that whenever you can, whenever it's sold enough of the old core, there isn't any more of it on the shelves or that sort of thing, you do a core 2.0 and you just don't reprint the problem cards, the power cards. You don't reprint the champions, you print a new champion in their place with a plan to rotate, or you take my advice and you don't print the champions in the core set. You just put in the non-unique staples that define each theme that you've picked up from the first few cycles in the core set. So your mendicants, your initiates, your whatever cards you feel define the core cycle for each clan. And aren't overpowered, you reprint those in the new core 2.0, and that would solve a lot of the problems of the game, right? It would. However, when's that going to happen? I mean, is it happening in 7 years' time with rotation? Is it ever going to happen? We don't know. We don't know if that's ever going to happen. FFG haven't talked about core 2.0 ever. There was a rumor it was going to happen because it happened in AGOT and it happened in Netrunner, but really, they're just rumors. I mean, a rumor in L5R will travel 1,000 places before it, actually means anything, before it's even true. People assume Core 2.0 was happening, but was it ever really confirmed? No. So, people assume Core 2.0 was coming after Cycle 5 with rotation, but it was never said. So Core 2.0 might never happen, but it would be the best solution for these problems because you could remove the power cards, you could do all these sorts of things, but assuming we can't do a core 2.0 for in 7 years' time, in 3 years' time, or now, what would be the best other solution? So, one solution is to power creep out the cards from core that are causing problems. Of course, try and imagine the card that power creeps out Bonsai, and you've got a problem. But then, of course, you have another problem, which is that the original card will still exist because you can't ban it because core is still your new player's set, which you need to introduce people to the game, and you can't ban too many cards that new players are going to get because they'll be put off basically when they try and move to the competitive scene and half of the first product they bought is no longer legal. Now, that's a point of contention because I personally think that the only reason people are going from the casual scene to the competitive scene is because of community. And if someone from your community sits down and explains, look, I know those cards you've got them now and you're annoyed, but look, you can borrow mine of these ones. And look, they were just really bad. They just had to go. People would understand. Like, they were really bad for the game. They just had to go. Anyone who's getting into the competitive scene of a card game is going to understand that statement. It's like, they were too powerful. They really just had to go. And the people who are explaining that to them are also the people who are best equipped to lend them the updated version or tell them which product to buy to replace the cards or that sort of thing. Really, I think the best solution, you can't power creep them out. We don't want a better version of Bonsai. We don't want a better version of court games. You just need to ban those cards and get the community to basically help people understand why when they're moving into the competitive scene where this matters, right? But those are two solutions. Power creep, just ban loads of cards and get the community to pick up the pieces. That's another solution, which I think would work personally. Another option, of course, which I think would be an elegant solution, is a core update pack. Pack that lets you ban the original cards, print new replacements for various things. It would just be a pack that gets sold maybe for a tenner alongside the original core, that maybe replaces the champions, replaces problem strongholds. Looking at you, City of the Open Hand. Other cards, the strongholds that people may object to. Maybe updates, Great Plains Outpost, maybe nerfs Mountains Amber Castle, for example. And then we could just tell new players who want to come competitive, look, just buy that. Buy that. It's got an update. It'll sort you out. 10 quid extra. I know you've bought 3 cores, but you got them on a discount. Pay 10 quid extra, you get a core update, and that would sell. It would sell to all the existing players. You chuck in some alt arts You'd probably use it to do your time skip, so you'd add your new champions, you'd add your new key characters, that sort of thing, new strongholds, that sort of thing. Um, and I'm really in favor either of just banning a lot of the problem cards and letting us pick up the pieces, so that this ratio of how much of the deck is core just goes down, and we get rid of power cards, and then let the community deal with it. Or the idea of a core update pack that lets us move the timeline along, and also gives a product for people to buy to supplement core that replaces the cards you're going to ban because they're too good. Because really, you have to address this fundamental problem. You have to address how fast the game is going to change and how fast the game universe is going to change. You have to decide when your pivotal moment that changes Rokugan is, and in my head it has to be sooner rather than later. Like, one of the reasons that people love this universe, and okay, there are people who like the mundane part of this universe where it's just a samurai on a dirt road in a Ronin village, and bad stuff is happening. But people also like this game for those dramatic moments that occur and that can only occur once in a generation. And one of the interesting things about the old version of the game is that those once in a generation moments could happen every 3 years with a new edition of the game. Whereas the timescale for this one is just this big question mark because it happens so slowly. And we get these pivotal moments like Shoju taking control that are that powerful. But unless the cards in the game change to match those moments, then it will feel hollow to the people playing those cards. I think that's the lesson and the idea I want you to take away from this video is that unless the cards we're playing with change to match the story of the game, then anything that happens in the story feels more hollow to the people playing the game. So if Yukuni died, for example, like he did in the old game on the Day of Thunder, and I still went in and sleeved Yukuni up for my decks, that would feel weird. The fact that you can still play Hida Tomonotsu, the fact that she was dead before Core came out, feels weird. It feels like the game is trying to harness its own feeling of a changing world, of Mono no Aware, but then failing to reflect that in the cards that we play because of the slow release of cards from cores, from cycles not rotating, from no new versions of characters being printed for certain characters. And that change itself in pace is vital, because without it, we just end up in a situation where, where nothing changes at the speed that it should, I guess is what I'm trying to reach at that. And I'm curious to hear, because I'm doing this video partly to share my own thoughts on core, on stagnation, on potentially what is the fundamental flaw in the speed that which LCG models can operate in terms of a universe like L5R, which demands dramatic and fast-moving moments. To just show you a comparison in terms of timelines of where we might have been if we were playing a different game with a different story that went more aggressively. To show you how a Game of Thrones used the same characters for a very long period of time. And remember, of course, that there was still first edition of Game of Thrones, which used the same characters for another 5 years, I think, before this version, or longer. And, I don't think L5R would get away with that. I don't think as a universe it does justice to the depth and power of the universe to constantly rely on the same headline character for a certain period of time. In the old game, that was 3 years. In the new game, it looks like it might be, it's at least 3, if not 4, if not 7. And I think 7 is too long. 7 is too long for the core problem to remain unaddressed. 7 is too long for the same unique characters to hit the board over and over again. And 7 is definitely too long for 50% of the decks to remain core, cards included. And I guess the few solutions I've posited all require a drastic decision, I think, in terms of what you're going to do and when. They require a decision about when the next arc. I'm hoping in my mind, and I don't know that there is a plan for when we hit that post Clan War Day of Thunder, and the arc changes to, it doesn't have to be Totori as the Emperor, it doesn't have to go down that route again, but whatever the next phase is in Rokugani history, I'm hoping they don't try and, that might be the point where we get L5R 2.0, like they did in Game of Thrones. I would welcome that if they decided to do L5R 2.0 after 7 years, and we got a time skip maybe, or we took Totori as the Emperor and we went into Hidden Emperor or Spirit War or something like that. Reusing some of the great story content from the old game. There's no shame in that. We've seen how in the 3 years we've had so far, they've taken what was originally story content from the old game, changed a few characters, put a new spin on it, rewritten it with a new awareness of modern social politics and what people are keen on understanding, and the modern sensibilities in terms of what feels like a good story, modern storytelling techniques, hired great writers who know L5R at the back of their hand. If they want to do that again for a second edition of L5R, that's fine. I think my point then for that is that if you're going to do that, there has to be more drastic change to characters within that space of time. 7 years is too long to be playing with the same characters and the same cards. You need a plan that sees the majority of those cards from the base set be replaced by other cards at a later stage. If 7 years is your time scale, and now that we've got a much better grasp on power levels, and I truly believe that the designers have a much better grasp on power levels in L5R, would be the perfect time for now to release a stopgap core update pack, or to ban aggressively cards from this original core. And then in 7 years' time, I keep saying 7 years' time, I mean 3 years' time, when we hit that 7-year mark, or 4 years' time, when you hit the Day of Thunder and you want to do that proper Core 2.0 rotation, that's when you take the lessons learned and you print lower power versions of cards, and then you can, there's a very simple concept in card game design, which is that if you start here with your core at a low power level, which gives you room to power creep up over the duration of a cycle, which leads you to a point where at the end of a cycle, there are more powerful cards that have replaced the ones in core, and you therefore don't have people playing with the same cards for all the time. So it'd be like, for example, core, you print something like Hurricane Punch, or you print something like Rising Stars Carter, maybe something that gives +2 or +3, right? But only, and then you get another bonus, but only if you work hard for it. And then by the time you hit the last pack in the cycle, when you know that the cards are going away soon, then you start printing cards like Bonsai, where you can just get +4 really easily. Or you start printing these more powerful cards that are fun, but you know that even if they break the game a bit, they're not going to be around much longer. And that's a fairly tried and tested card game design theory, where you start with a weaker base set, and then you build up to it, which is why if you look at something like Magic 2019 or 2020, a lot of the cards there are fairly weak and very boring. And then as the cycles come out that define that standard version of Magic, you'll see that the same effects are often copied but amplified slightly. So instead of getting your 1-for-1 who taps for 1 mana, you'll get a 1-for-1 who includes the keyword of the set, for example. So instead of having a 1/1 monk with blank abilities you put in a core set, you might have a 1/1 monk with composure, or like Togashi Initiate, for example. And in doing that, you rotate out the core cards with slightly better versions into more powerful versions. And by the time the versions get very powerful, that's when the next core comes out and you reach core 3.0, and then you have the game resetting again to a lower power level, which feels all right because everyone is at that power level, right? And that is a roadmap then for progressing through the story arcs of L5R. I think what we need to see, though, is a aggressive understanding of when that's going to happen. Personally, I think it needs to happen sooner. I think every 3 years is too short for an LCG. I think every 5 years might be okay. I think every 7 is way too slow. Every 4 years might be better. I think there are ways to use the LCG model and have time going faster. I think you could do a core 2.0. I think in after 4 years and 3.0 another 4 years later. And I think you could change the rules of the game a bit then, reprint new champions in the immediate cycle pack that comes after it. And I think you could include with core 2.0 a list of cards from the previous cycles that you think are still relevant and can still be played, and instructions on where to get them, or if they're out of print, permission to proxy them, or something, some solution, or put them out as promos or something. My point is there are systems to move the timeline on more aggressively, and I think there's a captive audience that is okay with this idea of L5R being reset every 4 or 5 years with a new arc, a new story to get their teeth into, new characters to engage with and fall in love with, and a fresh take on the universe. And I think if you do it too slowly, coupled with the problem of the current power level of core, you basically risk losing a lot of people to stagnation. I've said myself, and I'm not really fond of these sorts of statements, these ultimatums, that if we're still playing in decks that are 50% core in a year's time, I'm probably not going to be playing L5R. And a simple reason for that is I'm actually genuinely getting fatigue when I sleeve up a deck and I put in 2 Bonsai and I put in 3 court games and I put in, all of these cards. I put in my Raitsugas, my Niten Masters, to an extent, I want those cards gone, right? And I wouldn't mind if 6 of them were still around because they were key for the theme. I wouldn't mind if what I was playing instead was a slightly more powerful version of it, and the actual version I had in core was a lot weaker. And I wouldn't mind if there had been power creep in some way. But the fact that it's the same cards really does weigh on me, and I think there are ways to do things better, and I'm not going to get it, but I would really like if there was some frank discussion about where L5R was going in terms of a roadmap. And if Tyler wants to talk about it, I will interview him on this show if he wants to talk about, not even like hard set stuff, but like theoretically how he could see, different models of how L5R might unfold as a card game, for example. Even if it's 4 or 5 and none of them ever come to fruition, it would still be fascinating to get that idea of a long-term unfolding of a story that respects the universe's temporal nature. And it has to be temporal to keep that engagement going, because it's not like a Game of Thrones. It's not the same characters in the same universe being rebooted and respun up again and again and again. It isn't that. It's a living world where characters come and go, and we get new ones, and they get new storylines, and exciting things happen to them, and we move on. And I think a lot of players are looking at where the game currently is in terms of how many core cards are being played, how, I wouldn't say how slowly the game universe is progressing, because recently it has actually been moving pretty quickly, and there's a lot of interesting stuff going on in terms of story. But I think just an acknowledgement of when that's going to ramp up a notch, when we're going to see drastic change. So yeah, that's where I'm going to leave this. I think this was a bit of a rambly episode, and I'm sorry for that. I do like to keep these episodes structured, just to prove that I do have a you can't read it, but I do have a loose, basically, plot idea for my episodes when I do them. I write it out before I do it. But I think with these topics, when each point is so interconnected to another point, it can be hard to sit down and untangle that web of, because where does the importance lie? Is it in card stagnation? Is it in story stagnation and character stagnation? Is it in the slow turnover of cards? Is it in the power level of core? Or is it in the unique cards in core? Or is it just the consistency level? Is it how you solve the problem? All the points are so interlinked. You kind of have to sit down and just talk through them. So I'm going to leave the video there. I hope you found this interesting. Again, I've been really enjoying. People have been commenting on my videos. I've got loads of new subscribers. I'm obviously not in this for subscribers, or I stream games. I'm not in this for Twitch subs. But if you're enjoying my content, if you're enjoying engaging with my content, and you have thoughts, I am quite good at responding to chat on YouTube. Maybe you disagree with me. Maybe you think the game is going at a great pace. You're happy that it's not rushing through additions like it used to, that they're taking lots of time to get into the detail and the grit of the story and let you unfold these characters. Maybe you want to see the story continue at its current pace, but you also acknowledge the problem of core. Maybe you don't think they need to update, say, clan champions and things like that. They don't need a time skip or anything like that. They just need to deal with the problem of power cards in core. All of these opinions are perfectly legitimate. I value them. I accept that my view might not be that. So if you have a different view, or you want to ask questions or engage with me, just let me know. I'll do another video where I discuss what happened and followed on after that. Also, just a bit of housekeeping. I'll publish this on the 16th of April. The next London Legion online tournament is coming up on the 25th of April. As before, it is being run with 2-day ones on Saturday, one on US timing, I think at 11 a.m. Central, and one on UK timing at 10 a.m. UK, 11 a.m. in the continent. 2-day one Swisses into a 4 p.m. UK cut on Sunday. 2 weeks ago we had 70 players. I'm hoping to beat that. And the prize support is really cool. It's entirely community run. We've got donations going to help us fund the prizes and things like that. And it was a really good event. We did between myself and there was two other streamers involved, one in Spanish and myself and Handsome Dan in the US, who was also running the US event. So thanks to him. We produced about 40 hours of L5R content. We streamed different parts of the top cut bracket. We filmed what are going to be some of the best versions of L5R games you're going to see in this meta until the next event, and very much just making sure there's content available for people during this lockdown, and sort of filling a gap that OP can't until it's available. Other projects I'm working on just now, so people are up to date and can look after them, look out for them. At some point I'm going to do a series of conflict games, but for some reason I've just been busy doing other stuff and things like that. I have a few more videos like this where I'm talking, so if you like this video and you want to hear more thoughts about L5R game design, about these sorts of issues in terms of power creep and card management and those sorts of things, let me know. I come up with ideas like these every so often. I don't mind fleshing them out if people want to hear them. The other thing I'm debating doing, which would be good to take interest on, is maybe running an actual play of the L5R RPG. I've never run an RPG before, so I kind of want to cut my teeth. I admit that doing it in front of a stream as the first time game master might be a bit unnerving, but one of the things I found about streaming is that for some reason talking to a camera makes me want to produce content more rather than be nervous. It makes me want to do more. So I feel that I'll be a lot more engaged if there's an audience, even if it's just 5 people who really enjoy watching actual plays of L5R RPGs. So that's an idea I'm currently considering. Obviously, if I start pushing ahead with it, I'll probably run the beginner's box, the Emerald Castle box into Slowtide Harbour, and then I have already kind of a loose idea of where we'll go after that. So I'll probably look for players for that at some point. So that's where we are. I've been Steelfur, aka Finbar. As always, feedback for the channel's great. If you like what I'm doing, hit subscribe. Lots of members of the L5R community already subscribe to this channel, so you will not be alone. If you want to come and follow me on Twitch, my username is SteelFurLive, because Steelfur was taken and he hasn't used it in 4 years, but he won't give it to me. And if you want to reach out to me on Discord, Steelfur #4075. I'm pretty much always around, so just reach out and say hi. I'm happy to talk to anyone if you've got questions, thoughts, or feedback. You might be like, I really like you talking, but have you considered how great your video series would be if someone else was on the video series with you? And I say, that's a good idea. But, then I'd have to coordinate schedules with someone instead of having a thought and turning on a camera and speaking to you. So, that gets a bit complicated. I already bailed on one podcast because I didn't have the time to schedule with other people. They were in America. I would find an EU-based person to talk with ideas with me, and I would put their camera up somewhere over here, this way. That one. Maybe. Anyway, right, I'm going to leave you there. Thanks for watching. Let me know if you've got any thoughts. And yeah, see you next time.